So when the secular abuse literature talks about a woman regaining control, translated that means she's got to take control of the home and the kids and the finances, etc., and she remains in the home. And if she remains in the home, then that counsel is going to cause all kind of strife to escalate, which results in either divorce or death by one of them. And obviously, in the middle of all this, Christ is the only answer, right? To the non-Christian marriage. If they refuse to trust Christ, then they refer them, then the only thing you can do is refer them to civil authority. After reading a lot of this literature, I believe it's safe to say that the primary goal that they take to this is to stop the hurt. That's the primary goal. The question is how? How do they do that? How do they stop the hurt? Well, one of the most common ways in the counsel that's given is they teach assertiveness rights. They teach assertiveness rights. You can see this, for instance, in Frank Minerath and Paul Meyer and Stephen Otterburn's illustrate this in Christian integrationalist approach to abuse. They write, in situations involving abuse, those who are victimized must step out of the victim role by removing yourself from the house and from the victim role. You confront your mate's behavior and put your mate on notice that you are no longer accepting that behavior. If there is to be any chance of restoring the marriage, you must convey to your mate, preferably through a third party such as a counselor, that the marriage hinges on your mate's willingness to undergo intensive counseling for his violent tendencies. It should be a long time, and then they put in parentheses, if ever, before any attempt at reconciliation should be made. There should be considerable evidence that the abuser has gotten his behavior under control. The abuser should be in an ongoing accountability group, such as, they say, a 12-step group for rageaholics for many years to come, end of quote. Well,
what was that from again?
That is taken out of the Complete Life Encyclopedia by Minerath, Meyer, and Otterburn. It's published by Nelson Publishers. Page 13. It deals with abuse. Now, if you take this to be the case, if you teach assertiveness training or teach tough love principles, you end up really creating more problems in the marriage. An assertive person becomes offensive. An assertive person becomes demanding, which in turn brings out the worst in other people. And the assertiveness is basically built upon the critical idea that you've got to look out for self at all costs. That's the critical idea. Now you think about that theologically. I have to look out for myself at all costs. Assertiveness is just the exact opposite of what Jesus talked about in Matthew 5:5. When he talks about the fact, blessed are the meek. And you'll notice what he says about the meek. For they shall inherit the earth. So assertiveness training actually goes against kingdom principles. The way that you achieve that which is right. Now, I don't question the motives of people who are counseling this. You understand me. I think that they want justice in this situation. They want a peaceable relationship. But how they're going about it, I believe, ultimately is counterproductive to relationships. It doesn't end in reconciliation. But it does end in wrecks. And Jesus says the meek will inherit the earth, not the violent or the assertive. Well, the second way is that they teach principles of tough love. And this approach basically says, if you really love your husband, you'll draw boundaries around yourself, you'll make threats, and then you'll follow through with retaliation if those boundaries are breached. You'll make sure your rights are protected at all costs. That's exactly what tough love says. And I think it was Cloud and Townsend that published those series of books on boundaries, which is basically what this is all about, and sold them. I was just in Australia just a few weeks ago, and I was in a Christian bookstore in Australia, and there was a whole set of books on all these boundaries stuff. Obviously, I naturally gravitate to counseling sessions to see what's going on in Christian churches around the world. When you think about this in relationship to how the Bible describes tough love, it is the exact opposite of what Christ modeled. And we're going to see this in 1 Peter 2 in a little bit. Counselors who teach women this type of returning threat for threat are throwing gasoline already on a smoldering fire. No wonder this approach ends in either divorce or death as well. Studies are now coming out to support what biblical counselors have said for years, that abusive men do not beat and rape women because they think poorly of themselves, or because they have been depressed for a long time, and they really look down upon themselves as a result of that. That's absolutely false. And yet when you hear the psychologists and even Christian psychologists talk, that's their view of the problem. Professors from Case Western Reserve University and the University of Virginia studied dozens of people with violent behavior towards others, and they said that violent behavior is associated with high self-esteem, not low self-esteem. Quoting them, they said, people turn aggressive when they receive feedback that contradicts their favorable views of themselves. More to the point, it's mainly the people who refuse to lower their self-appraisals who become violent. A teen who doesn't receive the favorable respect he thinks he deserves will strike out at another. Cases that involve murder, rape, domestic abuse, and even terrorism indicated that violent people have high opinions of themselves. One study of more than 100 rapists showed that the rapist chose a particular victim in order to, quote, disabuse her of her sense of superiority. That is, the woman gave the man the impression that she thought that the woman gave the man the impression that she thought she was better than he was, and so he raped her as a way of proving her wrong. Good examples of this comes from Nazis in terms of white superiority. Ku Klux Klan, again, white superiority, that justified violence on those that they considered to be less favorable to them. So the authors of this study go on to suggest that efforts to increase self-esteem may actually be making the problem of abuse and violence worse. Teaching children higher self-esteem in schools, they say, may actually be compounding the problem of abuse or violence in the next generation. And you know what we should say as Christians? Duh. Abuse counseling that teaches a woman to make threats, retaliate, draw boundaries, be aggressively assertive, is foolishness by biblical standards. How do we know this? Let's look at a couple of passages here. Let's go to Proverbs chapter 11. Go to Proverbs 11. And verse 16. Proverbs 11:16. A gracious woman attains honor, and violent men attain riches. Honor is to be preferred over riches. Chapter 10, verse 19, Proverbs. When there are many words, transgression is unavoidable, but he who restrains his lips is wise. That's the opposite of assertiveness training, right? Assertiveness training then would be equivalent to foolishness. Proverbs chapter 15 and verse 1. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stirs up anger. In other words, interpersonal relationships is like a tennis match. A soft return from a hard serve brings players closer together. Same thing's true here. A gentle response brings two parties closer together. A hard smash with the ball drives them further apart. Or you take a look at Proverbs chapter 25 and verse 15. Proverbs 25:15. That says, by forbearance a ruler may be persuaded, and a soft tongue breaks a bone. In other words, a gentle tongue can be very powerful. Not an assertive, aggressive, demanding tongue that demands its rights. Assertiveness training in tough love psychology has left numerous, I believe, broken marriages and bodies in its wake. Is tough love asserting your rights, or is it suffering for righteousness' sake, the glory of God and the good of others? What is tough love? Furthermore, they teach take control of your life. Taking control usually translates into secretly withdrawing all the money from your banking account, hiding your valuables, taking over the finances, covertly moving out to an undisclosed location. Taking control often involves deception, deceit, stealing, and withholding from your mate anything that you feel that you will need. That's what taking control of your life means. Now, I don't know about you, but as Christians, I think we ought to have problems with that. When we're advocating deception, deceit, and stealing as a way to reassert oneself. If God is going to turn things around for righteousness' sake, He's not going to expect you to lie or cheat and steal in order to do it. What are we suggesting here? Well, the cycle of violence that you often hear about in abuse literature is actually enhanced or actually accelerated through assertiveness training, tough love, taking active control of your life. That's what it usually means. So that's what they attempt